I'm very, very excited to be joined by Derek Shulman here on the podcast uh, of Gentle Giant. We're going to be celebrating their new release, Playing the Fool, the complete live experience, which is a whole reimagining of the record and just sounds so amazing. So, Derek, how are you?
Comparatively okay. It's raining here. It's miserable and it feels like England, but I'm fine. Thanks very much. I appreciate the asking.
Well, it's miserable here in Boston as
Oh, really?
well. Just terrible, just raining all day. It's really coming down. So,
Yeah,
I'm
we're in
I'm
the same
glad to be
boat.
inside. Yes, unfortunately so. So I heard it was Dan's idea to reimagine this whole record. What was that initial conversation like with between you and Dan that led to the reimagining of Playing the Fool?
Well, well, basically, he's Dan has been a fan and also an archivist for many years. I mean, thank goodness he was there because um, way back when we had the tapes sitting in Gary's garage and Kerry's attic. They were falling apart, and he actually way probably in the early 2000s said, "You have to let me bake them and not let them disappear." Anyway, when we decided to remix "Playing the Fool," we reached out initially to what you call it. Boy, I'm blanking on names here. To Anyway, but anyway, the bottom line was when Dan heard that we were going to remix it, he came back to us and said, "Why don't you instead of remixing the same album that you've got, go back into the tapes that you have and you know." Why don't you do the show like you did when you were on stage? We thought, great idea. Stephen Wilson, by the way, was the
I
the
looked
name
at
on
it. Yeah,
the
yeah.
tip of my tongue, and I completely blanked. And Stephen has remixed several of our albums back in the day. Anyway, but it was a little too much for Stephen because it was four shows with many reels of tape, and he was very busy. So Dan said, again, as I said, um, what do you think about instead of just remixing what you had before, you didn't do you weren't able to put a couple of tracks on. You weren't able to put Ray's great violin solo, which is always a highlight of the show. And what do you think about doing it as the whole show and using the ambient mics, which were in the original mix, the audience and on stage and everything else, and that way you can almost be immersive in a Gentle Giant concert rather than just a live album. So we said, go ahead and try. So he took a lot of time and literally about 8 or 9 months in putting it together, which was, really a lot of work. But what transpired and what originally came out was, I think, spectacular, actually, to tell you the truth.
Oh, absolutely. And I was going to ask how long this took because it's it's such a
A
major
lot.
thing, but almost a year is definitely makes sense and it sounds like it for sure. Now, something I love is kind of like the added stage banter, the real changing. Now that like the whole concert's been extended, it feels like you're there, you're at the show. What is your opinion on these
Right.
added additions to the record?
Oh, I love them. I think again, as I said, the what he suggested was a great idea, and yeah, there's stage banter, but there's also you could hear the band, really getting yeah, let's go, the mics on stage and the mics in the audience, and again, we didn't play two songs from the album which we were about to start to promote interview, which weren't on the original. Playing the fool and Ray's solo, which was always a great part of the show where he would play in his on stage and have a lot of fun. But he had four speakers in the auditorium, and he bounced the sound around the rooms, and no one knew where the violin was coming from. So that was always a really special moment. So the fact that we have this now on this album and on the CD and the Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray is spectacular as well because the visuals are very enhancing of the album. But the sound is like again. it's like you put it on and you're at a Gentle Giant concert, even though if you weren't born or you were too old or whatever, you're there now.
Yeah, and as a younger fan, it's just such a great release to have in the band's discography now. Something I love about the band's live performances is sometimes, songs were lengthened or bits were altered. There were a lot of changes. Were these in the moment changes or were they always planned in rehearsals?
Oh no, we rehearsed a great deal. That's something that we always did. We were never we're not a jam band by any means. No,
That'd be quite impressive.
no, we worked out what we wanted to do. I mean, obviously not in the solos because solos were, ad lib, but certainly the length of solos were absolutely worked out beforehand. But as a yeah, we never took the song that we did on a recorded basis and recreated it on stage. We always like to lengthen it or enhance it or do something different because again, I've said this a million times, and I'll say it a million and one. The recording of an album or a song is like the sketch, but the live show was the painting. So realistically, that's what we love to do. We love to embellish and make it, both interesting musically and also entertaining as well. We had fun on stage.
Yeah, and to build upon that, talking about mapping something out and then realizing it, excerpts from Octopus is one of my favorite pieces.
Me too.
And I read, yes, that it's one of your favorites as well, which is crazy to me because you also mentioned that it was one of your favorites to play, and it's such a complicated piece. What factors specifically about this, track were your favorites to play?
Well, it starts off with a four-piece a cappella, very complicated vocal arrangement. But we learned it and it really worked out. But when we started, the audience didn't know what the hell we were doing, but and then we gelled it together, and then we bring in the instruments, different instruments. People would see, you know, violins, they'd see flutes, they'd see xylophones, they'd see all these crazy instruments we'd love to play because we could play them. And then we would go into that was the song Knots, which we love to do to start off with. And again, it was the excerpts from the album. So it was pieces of the songs from the album that we put together as a piece in the show. So then we would go to the heavy part, which that was always fun to do because the audience didn't know what the hell was going on. They were completely surprised by it. And that's what we love to do as well, is surprise the audience, but have fun ourselves.
And this remix is a great surprise. And I'm really, really happy that it's something in the band's discography and that it was the album's been fully realized at this point. It only took a few decades, but I'm glad that this whole experience is full now. I love all the band's remixes, remasters. Are there
Thank
any
you.
future studio records that you would want to remix or remaster in the future?
Well, we've pretty much, Stephen has done about four or five of probably more, uh, of our albums. The only one album, that, in fact, that he really wanted to do way back, his first one album he wanted to remix was In a Glass House. That was one which, he was dying to get his hands on and a board on and use his fingers to make it better sounding than it did because it was the first album that we did after my elder brother left. And it was us as a five piece. But this is the only album that we were not able to find the multi tracks. They were either gone, they went up in flames, either hidden, and we asked everywhere for many years, and we could not find the multi tracks. So um, that was always disappointing to us because it was one of our favorite albums and one of our biggest albums actually. Even though it wasn't released in America, it was one of the biggest imports that year in the USA. So I am in the studio right now, working with a brilliant engineer, with the highest end AI, and I'm separating the tracks and I'm remixing in a glass house. And it sounds amazing, I have to say. It really does. It sounds like it should have done back in the day, even better than back in the day. So that's probably on the radar in the coming, well, within the year.
Well, that's so
Or
exciting
yeah,
because when you're telling me that the tapes are lost, it's like, well, that's over. But yeah, AI now, you see the Beatles use it, well, Paul McCartney more
right,
specifically. But yeah, so that's cool that you can use that yourself because that's one of
right.
my favorite records, and I know a lot of the fans love it. So to see that fully, realized and to see like listen to it with new ears would be very, very exciting
Right.
for sure.
It really sounds it sounds amazing. I'm really happy with this, and we're going to do the 5.1 and the Atmos and everything else, and all the bells and whistles that we like to do together with everything else. So that will come in we'll see probably the end of the year, maybe early next year. In the meantime, I've written a book and it's coming out in September, so that's also in the works.
There's plenty to look forward to, it sounds, and that's very exciting as a fan. Now, playing the Fool obviously was a big celebration of the band's material, and I definitely want to touch on some of the studio records here. I know Tony Visconti was like a big impact on the band back in the day, especially for that debut album. How big of a role did he have on shaping the band's sound, and what was Tony's impact on that record specifically?
Tony was I mean, amazing is an amazing producer and was, and we were, this is a period of time when even he was kind of like getting involved and becoming the Tony Visconti he became, and so we were kind of novices all together in London putting it together for our first couple of albums. But his influence and mentoring, if you like, of the band was really important. I mean, he was an incredible musician. He is, and also able to score things. And it was his idea to put a recorder quartet in the first album. And in fact, he played it. Not we didn't play it. He did. But at the same time, uh, as we did the first album, he was working on T Rex's album and also David Bowie, Man Who Sold the World. So we were in the studio together with Tony. So it was an incredible atmosphere of creativity and such a lot of fun. And he was very important in having the band realizing what we were and pushing us to be what we became actually in the first within the first couple of albums. And in fact, just on a Tony Visconti story,
Yeah.
and he was recording Bowie at the same time, The Man Who Sold the World, and Bowie's best friend was a guy called George Underwood from Met School, and he was around the studio at Trident, and Tony introduced George to the band, and George said, "I'm an artist," and then we were looking for someone to do the cover, and we said, "Okay, well, George, why don't you give us a shot and see if you could come up with a good cover?" So he came. We were looking around for other people, and he came up with this logo with this giant face and the band in his hands, and we loved it. So the whole thing was meant to be. It was Tony and George Underwood and Bowie's. All those things came together and made Gentle Giant, Gentle Giant.
And it became the band's like mascot pretty much as
Yeah,
well,
pretty much. Yeah,
not
the
just for
logo, the
the,
mascot,
yeah,
the whole thing.
the whole
Yeah,
thing.
amazing.
Um, yeah, now Acquiring the Taste is one of my favorite albums. And I just want to clear a rumor here. Was it true that that whole album was built off a click track?
No, no, it
No.
wasn't. That's no, no. We had some music prepared, but not enough for an album. Truthfully, and we never used a click track then. We used a metronome actually. That was a different thing to a click track.
Okay.
Uh, and some of the tracks indeed were built on a metronome. And it was there were it was a very spontaneous album and a very creative album. I personally was uh, um, it was difficult for me because I like to be I'm more of a perfectionist and like to have things prepared. But for Kerry and Ray and the rest of the band, I mean, we love to build on certain things. About two-thirds of it was prepared, but I think a third of it of the album were built on metronome, clicks, and okay, well, what are we going to do here? And we didn't jam, and that's one thing we didn't do. But we had and then we heard the metronome and said, okay, let's see what we can come up with in either a written part or a riff or whatever, and went back home and listened to it again and came back to the studio. So yeah, it was done in a different fashion to most of the albums we did subsequently.
Yeah, I have to remind myself bands didn't have Pro Tools back in the day, you know. The
Pro
metronome
Tools.
is yeah. Why'd the band use this approach? It's quite a hands-on approach for your second album.
Because we had the first album come out, and even though it wasn't really a blow up, successful album, it did well enough for the public and the that record company to say, okay, we need to follow it quickly. It's this old story. You spend your first God knows how many years, or for us a year or so, recording and writing the first album, and then you have to go in and after about 3 or 4 months and write and record the second. Well, we weren't prepared for that. I mean, God, we were, because we toured in between. So that's why it was kind of like done in the way it was done. And it's a lot of people's favorite, because it was really um, very incredibly creative on the spot music. I found it a little more difficult personally, but I'm probably in the minority. But nevertheless, it turned out. I mean, it turned out some really great songs and great pieces of music that we played live, of course.
I believe that's a Brian May quote there, where he goes, "You have your whole life to write your first album, and you have 6 months to write your second." So,
Well, in our case it was three.
yeah. Well, I think it turned out excellent. Now,
Thank you.
Three Friends is one of my favorite albums by the band, and it follows. It's not really a concept, but more of a theme of these three friends. I'd love to know where this concept originated from because it sounds very personal.
Kind of, yeah. Me and Phil sat down with a lyrically. Carrie and Ray wrote most of the music. I wrote, some of the 10% of the music, 10-15%. Ray and Carrie came up with the music, and then we sat down together, and we it was a personal thing, I think. Yeah, for me and Phil, thinking that here we are, doing something. Remember your friend? I remember our school friends. What is he doing? And it's kind of when you're at school, you're all together, and where you end up is you have no clue about. So that's really the story. I mean, when you're kids, there's no the future of where you're going to be is not on the radar. What's happening tonight or tomorrow is more important than where you go in 10, 20, 15 years or 20 years. So that's the story, basically. Your friends, and you have everything in common. And then as you become an adult and you find your different ways, you start to realize that you don't have much in common. You've got, and that's the theme. You become separate entities, which is very sad, actually.
It
So
is in a
that's
way, but it's kind of beautiful how it's presented, I think. And it's because it's just life, you know,
yeah,
people drift. And
yeah,
that's why I thought it was so personal because it's stuff I've thought about in the past. And then to hear it, it's like, damn, you know, it makes me remember certain people. So I was
right.
wondering if maybe they were childhood friends by any of the members who drifted, but it sounds like, yeah. And
And,
that's
and,
kind of
and,
with everybody.
and then you come back when you're old, when you're old age like me, and you start to remember your old friends, and you start reminiscing with them and seeing what they did. So that's kind of the theme.
Now, the album Octopus, I heard was originally going to be comprised of songs for each member. Um, is this true? And
It
was
was
it,
a thought.
it was
It
a
was a
thought?
thought.
Why
Five
was why
minutes.
was it scrapped in the
It,
end?
it was, well, the songs themselves didn't lend themselves to really, doing any kind of like profile of
Right.
who of the band. Really, I mean, so it was a thought for 5 minutes, and then we thought this is, we don't like that the idea of being the word pretentious. So we thought, now let's just make an album of what we have, and there were 8 songs, and we that became Octo and Opus, and it became Octopus. And that was the reason why it's called Octopus. 8 songs, Octo, Opus song, or whatever it is, and it became Octopus.
Cool. Now, I want to say probably my favorite record, The Power and the Glory, which I read somewhere that is your favorite as
Yeah.
well. What aspects about this record make it your favorite?
Um, 2 or 3 things. Number one, that really becoming, we were really coming into our own musically, and also popularity wise. We were really doing very well in a lot of parts of Europe, a lot of parts of North America, and we were really gelling as a band. And when we wrote the album, um, for whatever reason, everything came very easily. The songs and the concept of the album. This is use the word concept. This is a real concept album, if you like. I mean, it sounds like a pretentious thing to say, but but nevertheless, it was a comment um, on what is happening today. I'm going to say that, and what happened back in when we did it the uh, with the corruption of power, and how it affects the populace, and how it affects different classes of people, and people, and the person in charge comes to you and says, I'm going to do this because I'm going to make sure everyone's taken care of, and ultimately he takes care of himself. It sounds familiar, in I don't know if it sounds familiar today, but
I think it kind of does.
me too as well. But I'm not going to comment and be
Yeah,
political here. But
yeah.
that was a story, and that's why it's one of my favorite albums. Both musically, because I think musically it really gels, and lyrically it really gels.
For sure. And I love the political lyrics of this record. Was there anything that was happening during the band's time specifically that prompted these political lyrics?
Well, the Nixon situation was certainly an influence of what was going on, and how it affected what was happening here in America. But it's a generalized theme, and you see it every goddamn
Yeah.
decades that happen, that you start to believe in government and or power, and power corrupts, and you see it nonstop, and it's awful. And that was the theme of the album.
Yeah, and it's one of those albums that just ages beautifully, unfortunately. Hopefully one day we can look at it in the past.
I hope
But
so. It would
yeah,
be nice.
me too. Now, The Missing Piece, I think, is a good album. I actually enjoy it quite a lot. And we're talking about going up the band's discography here. And there's obviously a very notable stylistic change on this record. Was this a conscious effort? Was this due to label pressure? Or do you see it as more of like a natural evolution of the band's sounds at the time?
Um, it was a natural evolution, although you know, we can't deny that there was a pressure from the not the record company. Record companies never pushed us in any direction. We were always very, very independent, no matter what album we were doing, or whoever was involved in the music. But we just felt that um, radio had changed in America. AOR, which used to be, album radio, started playing singles from an album, and some of the bands that we were like lumped in with were able to transcend their sound into a 3-minute song. And so I think in certain respects, we thought, okay, maybe we should try it, but not really dive into the 12-foot end. Let's put our toe in the water. So we tried, and it was our toe in the water, but keeping our regular integrity intact. Some fans, so side two is more of what used to be. Side one is sort of our toe in the water to see if it's warm enough to jump in.
Yeah, and I do adore that record quite a lot, and that's cool to hear kind of the backstory of the sound. Now, this is a kind of a metal podcast, so I do have to ask. Famously, your first American tour was with Black Sabbath. I know maybe didn't go as planned, obviously. Now, that LA show was very notable for you guys because I believe someone threw a cherry bomb on stage while you guys were performing. Now, I'd love for you to talk about what the band's initial reaction was and what was the aftermath of that incident.
Well, you're aware of it, and I'll tell your listeners what it was. And we were the tour of Sabbath was hilarious. We were great friends. I mean, I love those guys. I mean, we had the same management, but Gentle and Giant and Sabbath, and that was our first tour, so no one really knew us. And so when we get with a Sabbath crowd, and Sabbath had just broken through in a huge way, and when they saw a violin and cello, they were like, "What the hell's that?" So the boos or went up, but eventually we were able to get the crowd and on our side. Anyway, the last show was L.A. and while we were playing "Funny Ways," which is a violin cello song, someone threw not just a cherry bomb. It was almost like it was almost a bomb because it was so loud. And we did something that a band should never do, is we stopped playing. And I went up to the microphone and said, "Yeah, hey, hey guys, this is not cool. I mean, you should really, you should really come. Let the band let us play and finish our set." However, my elder brother, who was a little more mercurial than I am, went up to the microphone and said, "You guys are a bunch of C dot 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 TS." And the boo was spectacular. I wish I wish I'd have been able to can that boo and sell it afterwards. But
Yeah, make it your
we,
ringtone. Yeah.
oh man, no, absolutely, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but then we finished the set and got the hell out of LA.
Yeah. Was that the final date of the
Yep,
tour? Wow. What a way
yep.
to end. What a bow
But
on top of that.
yeah, but even Sabbath on that tour, they at the very same show, they get so wasted that I mean this is their beginning of their Chemical Romance across the board, and Tony, um, we as I said we got off stage, but we hung around for their set, and Tony was like they were pretty gone, and he collapsed on stage. Well, actually, what happened was he actually fell, and his guitar fed back. I mean, and we thought, wow, this is great. The crowd were going, they were going, they were they were going apeshit. And I thought it was part of the show. I mean, like 5 minutes, it was like, woo, everything. We thought, but he didn't get up, and finally the road crew, dragged him to his feet. Anyway, so that
Oh
was
my God.
L.A. Jungle Giant and Black Sabbath. That was it.
Gee, that must have been that plane ride back must have been like, what the hell did we just go
Oh yeah,
through?
oh yeah. We'll never play in this town again.
Yeah.
Although we did a year later, and we sold out like 6 to 7 shows at the Whiskey, which it was amazing transformation from there to what happened the year after.
Must have been a great palate cleanser for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely was.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to talk about your time as a record exec because you signed a lot of notable bands, one of them being Pantera. Their sound was pretty new at the time.
Oh
I'd
yeah.
love to know what your reaction to their music was and what factors of their sound drew you to them.
Oh, I was aware of them when I was at Polygram, and I told their attorney just wait until I became president of Atco Records. I well, I saw a videotape of of the band with the new singer Phil, and they were doing new things from their earlier music, and I was completely astounded by it. I said, "Wow, what is this?" And I went down to Arlington, Texas, after when I became president, and and when you're on the side of the fence, if you like the music, you have to make sure what you're signing at least has a chance of selling, if you like, whatever that means. Excuse me. Um, no, it's part of the gig.
For
Um,
sure.
but I went down to this little club in Arlington, and they were playing, and within 3 songs, I was thinking, okay, within 3 songs, I was not just uh, transformed. I became an incredible fan of this band. I've never seen anything like Phil as a frontman, but Vinny and Dimebag and Rex, of course, playing wise, they were just beyond comprehension. I almost jumped in the schmosh pit. I mean, almost. I didn't say I did, but almost.
Close.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just knew that if they transformed me, this jaded old guy, who's the head of a company, to become this. I knew that they had something which is magical, and I knew that if I signed them, I may not be able to get them on MTV. I may not be able to get them on the radio because they were really heavy. But what I did was put money behind them to tour because I knew that if they made me become a fan, they would make their fans who came to see them, they'd tell their friends, I've just seen the most amazing band. And within a year, Cowboys from Hell came out, and within 2 years, they were headlining arenas.
Yeah, became massive, absolutely
Massive.
massive.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to hear your part in the band's, growth and what they
Yeah.
became.
Yeah.
Now I have to ask this. I know you've dabbled with many genres, not just like as a record exec and whatever. I'm not sure if you know this, but there's this rapper. His name's MF Doom. He's one of the most famous rappers, and he
Oh,
put
yeah.
out this record, Mad Villainy,
Oh,
which
yeah.
a lot of people believe, including myself, is the greatest rap album ever put out. And he actually sampled Funny Ways on that album on a song called Stranger Ways, and it heavily samples it.
Oh,
Did
yeah.
did you knew about this?
Well, I knew about, yeah, we started to know about this world of hip hop world quite a while ago, and I love it personally. I think it's superb. I really do. I think, yeah, I know about the Mad Villain, uh, and yeah, we knew about that, and even then, since then, we've been sampled by a lot of hip hop artists. Most recently by Travis Scott, who basically opens his show and opens his latest album with a song that's called Hyena with Proclamation.
True, yeah.
And for whatever reason, and actually Questlove told me, and that's something and I met Questlove backstage at the Tonight Show, quite a few years ago, and he came out and he said, "Are you, their musical director at the Tonight Show said, are you the Derek Shulman that was in a group called Gentle Giant?" I said, "Yeah," and as the Roots came out of this is before their show, and I was bringing Ann Wilson, who I was running a company to sing with the Roots, and they all came out and did kind of "We're Not Worthy" to me.
And it's really cool that rappers are sampling your band. Now, I want
Me
to
too.
ask like a really broad question here. What's your opinion on the like what the music industry has turned into? I think it's shifted quite a lot these past couple of years with social media. What's your opinion on its current state?
The music business or music generally,
Well, I'm saying a little bit
or
more of the
both.
business, like
Uh,
the industry.
honestly, I really don't have much time for it.
Yeah.
I'm being very honest with you. It's really completely analytically processed, and when we're talking about Gentle Giant's live album, and why we did it, and during that period of time, there was a few other live albums that came out, and the reason yeah, we did it because it was a milestone in the band. We were, kind of saying, okay, it's time to do this because we had a lot of fans saying, well, you're better live than the record or whatever. But what was interesting was the reason why was because we could play, we could really play our instruments. We didn't have backing tracks, we didn't have auto tune, we didn't have backing singers, we didn't have tech that was helping what we did musically and personally. Today you can literally with AI now. I mean, you can sit there and make a record, and does that have any lasting value? I don't think so. I mean, that's the issue. I think there's going to be. I mean, there are a few artists that have certainly. It's a whole lot of creativity out there. There's so much, but it's stymied by what the tech world could do. And that's very sad. And I think, yeah, once it comes together, my thought, and this is crazy, is that there's going to be a band, an artist or a band, and there has been a couple, obviously, with Adele or Ed Sheeran, whatever, that have come out and become incredibly popular and be also incredibly creative. But I think there's going to be a backlash on what's happening, and I think if a band came out and with no effects, with no tech, just bare bones. They could play superb songs with no background, like the Beatles did way back. If you remember the Beatles with with three guitars, a drum on a riser, and playing just great music, and and becoming an immensely popular. That's going to happen somewhere in the next couple of years. There's going to be a big backlash on tech, and it's going to come back to that, and it'll intermingle with tech because that you can't go back. You always have to go forward. But that will happen, and that will hopefully transform kids who want to be creative to pick up an instrument and be good at it.
Yeah, and as you know, the younger generation, I feel like there is a lot of tension there already, and people are kind of craving something a little more authentic, than a
Exactly,
lot of
the
the
word
stuff
is
coming out
authentic.
today. Yes, exactly. And I feel like there are a few
Yeah,
bands, like there's a band King Gizzard, I think, that are doing that 100%. And there's a few out there, but you kind of have to search for them. But I do think over time, they're going to start to become more and more popular, and bands like that will become the front of the line instead of way back hidden, in the record stores. But
right.
Derek, it's been an
Yeah.
absolute pleasure talking to you. Playing the Fool is out now, the complete live experience. Get on a vinyl. The Blu-ray's out. It's worth every penny. I cannot wait to get my hands on the vinyl. Um, Before we end things, I just want to ask, what's the best way for fans to stay updated with Gentle Giant and everything coming up in the future?
So just go to the website gentlegiantband.com. Get merch, get updates on what we're doing. Whatever it is. My son is instrumental in helping. He's become my manager, which is great news.
Awesome, awesome. Well,
So
best of luck to him, and that's funny to hear. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor talking to you, man. So thank you so much again for taking the time out. Really appreciate it.
my pleasure, man. Very good to speak to you.
You too. I'm Brandon Battick, and this has been
Yeah.
Disturbing the Priest.